Christianity has been, historically, a Middle Eastern religion with its origin in Hebrew tribal Judaism. Eastern Christianity refers collectively to the Christian traditions and churches which developed in the Middle East, Egypt, Asia Minor, the Far East, Balkans, Eastern Europe, northeastern Africa and southern India over several centuries of religious antiquity. It is contrasted with Western Christianity, which developed in Western Europe. As a historical definition, the term relates to the earliest Christian communities and their long-standing traditions that still exist. Christianity as a religion was founded by Jesus Christ and his 12 apostles. Christianity was an underground movement, having been in conflict with Judaism and then also with the pagan Roman Empire. Much of early Christianity as an underground movement had no above-ground or established churches, as many of the early Christians attended synagogue and prayer meetings at their homes and other secret locations. Church meant gathering or community more so than building or structure. Some during the times of persecutions and secrecy did have churches that were underground though, as can be seen in the underground cities of Anatolia and the catacomb churches of Rome. Many churches which were established as primary in authority were established by the early apostles. This tradition is outside of the canon of the Bible but is tied to the canon, in the sense that each church used their respective gospel given to them by their community's founding apostle, to establish Christianity in their respective regions. Tradition stated that Saint Mark founded in the small Jewish Christian community in Egypt as the Patriarch of Alexandria, the Egyptian and therefore by proxy the African churches or communities. That St. James, brother of Jesus, as the established first Patriarch of Jerusalem, St. Peter being the establisher of the Church in Jerusalem with St. James. St. Peter is also the first Patriarch of Antioch, whereas by tradition the churches of Greece and the Mediterranean islands were founded by St. Paul and St. John. St. Paul and St. Peter by tradition are noted as the founders of the Church of Rome. The churches of Babylon and India being founded by St. Thomas and also by St. Paul. The churches of Southern Asia, Armenia, Bulgaria, Ukraine, Georgia, the Balkans and Eastern Bloc states and Constantinople by St. Andrew, St. Jude and St. Bartholomew as founders of the Church of Armenia. St. Matthew being the patron saint of Italy, though Orthodox tradition has him martyred in Ethiopia. There were, of course, other communities established by Christians that were not the original apostles. Some Christian communities were established by the 70 disciples of the apostles. Also important were the 7 deacons. Ethnic groups: Jewish Christians, Assyrian Christians, Aramaean Christians, Armenian Christians, Georgian Christians, Maronite Christians, Arab Christians, Indian Christians, Greek Christians, Egyptian Christians, Ethiopian Christians, Persian Christians, Kurdish Christians, Turkish Christians, Slavic Christians, Maltese Christians and Eastern European Christians. The Pentarchy, the churches that were the original churches founded by the apostles, were later established as authority centers under the Pentarchy of Patriarchs. Rome, i.e., the Pope, the only Pentarch in the Western Roman Empire. Alexandria, currently in Egypt. Antioch, currently in Turkey. Jerusalem, currently in Israel, Palestine. Constantinople, currently in Turkey. Common characteristics of Eastern Christianity. Eastern Christianity, the churches established in the Middle East, was done so under the concept of unity, i.e., Catholic and or ecumenical. Such an understanding was based on the tradition of unity within the different ancient Christian communities. One such tradition is the biblical texts used by each of the ancient communities or churches. Unity was established in what was taught to the communities by Christ and then his apostles, which was doctrinal in its expression. When various persons or groups within the many ancient Christian communities began to come at odds with innovations or interpretations of the traditions of Christianity, the communities set out to clarify the validity of the variation in the comparison to traditional understanding. to establish why this change was to be accepted or rejected, as such was the case of the First Council in Jerusalem. The later councils were prompted to clarify tradition and address what was proper and what was improper. Proper being what was established by Jesus Christ and then his apostles, then the 70 and the clergy of the churches, and the patristic text, that take their lineage directly back to the apostolic era. Innovations being that which changed the understanding that Christian communities had as the basis for the understanding and definition of their religion. Such innovations, whereas the community believed, at the expense of tradition. Tradition being then established as dogma, a dogma which mystically created a relationship between each individual and the personal triune God. Any innovation which cut off this relationship and was therefore to be condemned. This right believing and right teaching was to first establish in each individual a personal relationship with Christ, the God. This original teaching established by a community of persons that through these traditions created and then maintained a relationship with God. As various teachings appeared, the Church as a united community addressed and confirmed or denied the teaching or teachings. Tradition was the cornerstone to how teachings were to be deemed valid, since tradition itself cultivated a living relationship with the living God. The councils which were conducted after the legalization of Christianity were done so to define what Christianity and a Christian was. This in contrast to paganism and the Judaism and the various non-traditional Christian beliefs of the time. The Christian communities not within the regions of the Empire of Rome still communicated with one another, and it was the breakout of the sectarian, and deemed new to tradition, teachings of Arius that caused the communities to gather to define what a Christian was and to use this definition to counter the teachings of Arianism. Eastern Christian ecclesiastics. Ecclesiastical structure of the Eastern churches. The ecclesiastical structure of the church is based on Judaism, as was the layout of the church once Christianity became legal. Systematic persecution of the early Christian church caused it to be an underground movement. The first above-ground churches were officially built in Armenia. Armenia was the first country to legalize Christianity around 301 AD under King Tiridates III, and also embrace it as the state religion in 310 AD. However, illegal churches before Christian legalization are mentioned throughout church history. Such an example would be in the persecutions of Diocletian. Of the underground churches that existed before legalization, some are recorded to have existed as the catacombs in Europe, Rome, and also in the underground cities of Anatolia such as Derinkuyu underground city. Today the gate, though, which Paul escaped, named Bapkisson, and mentioned in the second epistle to the Corinthians, have been converted into a church in Paul's memory. This is a structure still standing that dates from the time of the apostles. Ecclesiastic services or liturgical services, and in specific the Eucharist Service, are based on repeating the actions of Jesus, using the bread and wine, and saying his words. The Church has the rest of the liturgical ritual being rooted in the Jewish Passover, Seder, and synagogue services, including the singing of hymns and reading from the Scriptures. The final uniformity of liturgical services became solidified after the Church established a biblical canon, being based on the apostolic constitutions and Clementine literature. As a common characteristic of Eastern Christianity, each shares the standard liturgy structure which came from the liturgy of St. James. Clergy. The clergy of the Eastern churches are the bishops, priests, and deacons, the same officers identified in the New Testament and found in the early church. Bishops include archbishops, metropolitans, and patriarchs. Priests include archpriests, protopresbyters, hieromonks, and archimandrites. Deacons also include hierodeacons, archdeacons, and protodeacons. Subdeacons, however, are not deacons, and comprise a separate office that is not to be major clergy, as do readers, acolytes, and others. Bishops are usually drawn from the ranks of the monks, and are required to be celibate. However, a non-monastic priest may be ordained to the episcopate if he no longer lives with his wife. Ascetic or charismatic orders, monastic or ascetic orders. Pre-ecumenical Christian heresies. Meetings between Christian communities or churches were held before the ecumenical councils. These meetings, however, were not as large, because the Christian Church was still an illegal community. These early meetings and correspondence lead to the clarification of early heresies. Orthodox Christianity, Roman Empire and Byzantine Orthodoxy. The creation of the universal Christian Church is a complicated and long history. Hebrew, Egyptian, Greek, Roman and Arab Christian communities of the Mediterranean faced various opposition from governments, opposing religions, and splinter groups from within their own faith. This Catholic movement within the cradle of Christianity was to unite all Christians into a universal church based on Christ through tradition, faith and community. The communities sought to balance unity with truth. The truth of these early groups was a shared truth that was communicated to each successive group based on early tradition. Once documented, it was the understanding of tradition that caused the various schisms and internal conflicts. Christianity as first established was united Christians from within the Imperium Romanum. The Roman Empire ruled the Middle Eastern coastal communities and the Mediterranean during the time of Christ. As Christians within the Roman Empire, many different nationalities and ethnic peoples were subject to Roman rule. Though the power of the empire was seated in Rome, the greatest unifying force of the empire was its foundations, which were built on the conquest of Alexander the Great. It was the Hellenistic Empire, which established a unified civilization of the Mediterranean and Greater Middle East, parts of Africa, India and southern Europe. With its conquest of the Mediterranean including Egypt and Babylon, that Rome inherited by its absorption of the Hellenistic Empire. The unity was based on the implementation of Common or Koine Greek as the language of the empire. It was this language that the earliest Christians' texts were written in. A marked change in the life of the Church occurred in 313 when Emperor Constantine the Great proclaimed the Edict of Milan and legalized Christianity within the Roman Empire. As the communities united by a Christian faith in tradition lived on to see the legalization of their religion, they were faced with the need to address various misconceptions and unclear definitions of their faith in tradition. This culminated in the early writings of the Church Fathers and then later the ecumenical councils set to define the Christian faith in tradition. It is this origin founded by Christ, his apostles, the 70 disciples, patristics, Church Fathers, ecumenical councils, teaching of the holiest Christians and witness of martyrs that the Eastern Christian Orthodox community is based on. These all being traditions that found expression in art, literature, architecture, linguistics and ascetic activities of these earliest Christian communities. The Eastern Christian communities were united as a whole, though as with all groups of humans, not every single person who claimed to be a Christian was accepted as a member. St. Thomas Christians. St. Thomas Christians are found in the southern Indian state of Kerala. These Christians of Malabar trace their roots back to St. Thomas the Apostle, who arrived along the Malabar coast in the year AD 52. In their tradition, St. Thomas is referred to as Marthomaslia, which translate roughly as Lord. St. Thomas the Apostle. St. Thomas Christians had a unique identity till the arrival of Portuguese in India, who converted St. Thomas Christians in their area of control to the Catholic Church. As a result of this foreign intervention into their culture, there are several present-day St. Thomas churches, primarily in the Catholic and Oriental Orthodox traditions. Among the St. Thomas Christians, now the largest church in terms of membership is the Sero Malabar Catholic Church, a major archiepiscopal church in communion with the Bishop of Rome with a membership approaching 4 million adherents.